There was a physical incident that happened and my boys saw and the police were called. And when the sheriff came out, the county sheriff, I will never forget these words. He said, "Ma'am, you are not raising boys, you are raising men. And they need to know that this behavior is unacceptable." And it changed my whole life, those words.
Hello, sweet friends. I'm Stephanie Jacobs, a storyteller and advocate for social justice, and your host of the Love Light Stories podcast, a place where we uncover a deeper understanding of humanity through beautiful, redemptive stories that inspire our hearts. If you long to see more love, empathy, and true connection in our world and your own life, you're in the right place. After spending multiple years studying social justice issues, I've realized the power story has in helping us to understand, empathize, and transform our worldviews into something that's just that, views that are truly worldly. Here in this space, we'll embrace our humanity through raw and authentic stories told by real people themselves. We'll amplify their voices and learn to connect in more meaningful ways. Poverty, human trafficking, incarceration, race, immigration, and more. We'll embrace difficult conversations, sometimes controversial topics, and lighthearted stories too. If you wish to uncover the hope, love, empathy, and connection we can find in our fellow humanity, this is a show for you. So, are you ready, lovely? Let's jump in. Well, hello there, lovely. Welcome back to the Love Light Stories podcast, where we create space for real personal stories to be seen, heard, and understood. If you haven't yet, be sure to rate the show, follow, and share it with your family and friends. In this episode, I'm sitting down with Jen Jacobson Brusa, founder and owner of Beloved Cheesecakes. You'll hear her story of abuse, both as a child and in her marriage, and how God is using the greatest trials in her life to serve up love through her wildly successful Beloved Cheesecakes business. As one might guess, my first introduction to Jen was by way of eating her delectable cheesecake. My family received a box of cheesecake over the holidays, and my dad curiously looked up her business, as a former business owner would do, and was touched by her story. He suggested I might like to reach out to Jen. And after reading about her story myself, I knew I had to. This is a redemption story of God's love and providence over our lives. Now, before we jump in, I want to put a little disclaimer out there that Jen's story covers multiple difficult topics you might not want little ears to hear. I want to thank Jen, though, for her openness and vulnerability in sharing her story so that we can come to understand some of the lessons she's learned through tremendous trials, be inspired by the way God has moved in her life, and celebrate alongside her for the life she's living today. Thank you, Jen, for gifting us your story. Let's dig in. Jen, welcome to the Love Light Stories podcast. It is so exciting and such an honor to have you on the show today.
Thank you for having me, Stephanie.
Yes. So I actually reached out to you through your website, just your messaging site, saying, "Hey, I really love your story. Would you want to come join me on the podcast?" And I came across you because our bank actually gifted my family one of your cheesecakes. And my family is located up in Minnesota. And so it came all the way across the country. And it was really great cheesecake, by the way. But when we looked up your story, actually my dad mentioned, he's like, you should look at her story behind the business and you might want to reach out to her. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have to. So anyway, thank you for accepting my invitation to come on here today and share your story.
Absolutely. I love what you're doing. It aligns with my life and values and everything. So it's awesome what you're doing as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think everyone will actually see how much your story really aligns with the purpose and intent behind this podcast as we go. So why don't we just start way back where your story begins in your childhood? You had some really difficult experiences. Could you just share a little bit about that and start us out?
Yeah, starting from my childhood, my parents were married and got divorced when I was 2.5. At least that was my understanding. And I ended up living with my dad, and my mom went on her way. And my dad was a meth addict. And so I had no mom in my life and no siblings. And that's how I was raised, in this meth lab environment with all my dad's druggy friends. And I mean, I have a lot of crazy stories, starting from I think my first earliest memory is probably waking up in the middle of the night when I was 5 years old, and my dad was gone and my ear was popping and hot wax was pouring out, and it was just the most excruciating pain. And my dad was gone, and that was my normalcy of my childhood. He was gone for days at a time, and I was there to kind of just fend for myself. And my dad did the best that he could as being a meth addict.
Yeah, that must have been really scary too, even just that one instance where you're sharing this story of like, what's happening to my ear and I really don't feel well, and no one's there to help ease that pain or help assure you or comfort you or anything. And as a young child, we don't really know how to handle that, right?
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, I don't know how long it took for him when he came back. In my childhood brain, I know he was gone for a couple days, but I think God has given me, I think he gives people with trauma the ability to disassociate and not go to those places. I don't know. I can only imagine when my kids were 5 years old and I'm thinking of leaving them. I was like, oh my gosh, there's no way I could ever leave my child home alone at 5 years old for days at a time.
Right. Even for an hour, right?
Yeah. Even for that.
And you mentioned no mom. Was your mom in your life at all at that point?
No, I got my mom, honestly, was dead until I think I was 10 when CSD got involved and took me away from my dad. And that's when I found out, oh, my mom's alive, and she had remarried and she had 2 daughters up in Washington and I was in Oregon.
Wow. How did that make you feel at that age to find out she was alive and then she had these other children, but you weren't in her life?
Well, I was super excited. I had wanted a mom. I can remember Mother's Days at school, everybody making a gift for their mom, and I didn't have that. So I can remember as a child saying, well, who do I make a gift for? And they would say, well, maybe your grandma or your dad. And so I was really excited to find out that my mom was alive, and I stayed with her for 1 week, my fifth grade year. And then that was it. And then my seventh grade year, I got taken away again from my dad. And she asked me if I wanted to live with her the summer before my eighth grade year. And so I thought, okay, it's going to be better. I'll live in a clean house. You know, my dad's house was rat infested, dirty. I thought it'd be better. But she herself, and the pain that she went through in her life and not knowing Jesus, she was a narcotic where she took 24 to 36 Tylenol codeine a day. And so she was a zombie. I mean, it was better environment, you know, and my stepdad, he was a good provider and a good husband and stuff. But yeah.
It still didn't fill that longing for your mother in your life, it sounds like.
No, I mean, like I said, I met her my fifth grade year for 1 week and then that was it. And then right after seventh grade, I ended up moving in with her. I didn't feel like I fit in. I didn't feel welcomed into the family. And I've totally forgiven my biological mom. She didn't grow up in a loving home and she grew up in foster care and messed up. And so she was only loving me to the capacity she knew how, which wasn't very well, but I don't blame her now. I mean, at that time when I was younger and before I knew Jesus, I did, but not now.
Right, right. Yeah, that's a big distinction. And then meanwhile, I think you shared with me that your dad actually passed away as well, right?
Yeah, that was really hard because so I got taken away from my dad the summer before my eighth grade year and ended up deciding to move with my biological mom. And I can remember being in court with my dad and seeing him cry and break down. And I just felt that responsibility of I raised him, I took care of him, and I could see he was really upset, but he was losing me. So that was the summer. That would have been summer of 90 because he ended up having a brain aneurysm in February of 1992.
Wow. And how did that affect you when that happened?
I blamed myself for the longest time because I wasn't there. So I thought my dad losing me. And then after he lost me, we had a German Shepherd. And I remember him calling me and crying, saying that she had got hit by a car. Ooh, that was going to make me cry for a second.
Oh,
I haven't thought about that for a while. Anyways, I just really felt the responsibility of why he died because I wasn't there to take care of him. And his body was shutting down in my childhood. And now I can look back as an adult where he was throwing up a 5-gallon bucket of red Gatorade. Often it was probably maybe once a month or every other month. So his body was already shutting down. But I definitely blamed myself. And he was 39 and I was 14 when he died. The last words I had said to him on the phone, it was in December of 91. And my biological mom was standing right there and telling me what to say to him, which was, that I hated him. I didn't want to see him anymore until he got help and all this stuff. So that was my last conversation I had with him. And then next thing I know, I'm getting called in my Spanish class that my dad's in the hospital. So coming down to Oregon and seeing him, and his head was as big as a basketball and swollen, and he was completely brain dead. So I just said to my dad, I was like, Dad, I love you. And he just jerked. And so I know that hearing is the last thing that goes. I know that he heard me.
that's good. Yeah, that's probably comforting to know that he at least heard what you had to say. I think it's interesting too. You've used the words a couple of times. I took care of my dad, or I wasn't there for him, and you were 14 at the time. And I just think that's really interesting that you felt you were in that position, and probably not just felt, but that was the reality you were in. And to have to feel that way as a child must have been very difficult just in itself.
For sure. I did take care of him because when people are on drugs, meth, all I know was meth. That was my experience, but he would be up for days at a time. And when he was up for days at a time, he was super nice. I would actually beg his friends to stay over because if he stayed up, he would get me food and he was just nice. It's weird when completely high. But then when he was coming down, he would sleep for probably a week straight. And that was when a lot of the abuse took place and a lot of the meanness. And so I would make him steak. I can remember making him steak at 5 a.m. in the morning because he wanted steak. Or I was telling my husband the other day, I never got a full night's sleep as a child. Well, I would at my grandparents' house when I would go and visit, but at my dad's, when my dad was coming down, it was really weird. He'd want me to go get him a Mountain Dew from the refrigerator. And so he'd wake me up in the middle of the night and he would keep yelling for me until I would go get him that Mountain Dew. So those were the things that I felt like I was doing to take care of him. I know it's a weird thing, and then emptying his puke bucket and just doing whatever he needed me to do.
Wow, I'm sorry. Just as I hear you saying this, it's just difficult to hear and try to imagine you having to do that at such a young age. And that's definitely not how it should be. Yet that was your experience. So anyway, I'm sorry that that's what you had to walk through. And as you got into your teen years as well, I know you mentioned you were really craving for your mother's love and you were looking for love and wanted a family or just wanted to feel that love. And so can you just share what your teen years were like?
Yeah. So teen years were hard. I think teen years in general are hard if you come from a good family or a messed up family. You're trying to figure out who you are and what you like. And I never really fit in. So it was a challenge. But then to be living with my biological mom during my teen years, words of affirmation now I know is my absolute love language. Obviously, you can see all my words or
Yeah.
my whole business is words, but she really destroyed me in her words. And my dad was very physically abusive. And to be honest, I would say I would rather have the physical abuse than the words because the words, they don't go away. So I've had to fight those word curses, whatever, for a long time. I mean, I'm 47. I still fight it. With my biological mom, I don't know if there was resentment with her, like she didn't get me all those years. And I'm not quite sure, but we butt heads. I was very obedient child, so I was very fearful of authority. And so I did everything that she'd asked. But there was just a lot of weird things and controlling things. And I couldn't have seconds, or I walked a funny way, or I couldn't wear my hair up because you have too high of a forehead, and all these things that she would say to me. And you have a reading level of a fifth grader that she would tell me. Pretty much I was dumb in her eyes or whatnot. So it was a month before my senior year. And I was a young senior. So it was right before I turned 17. We had gotten to a pretty heated argument, and basically she told me not to tell her that I love her, because I don't know what love means. So it was a heated argument, and I just planned on running away. I was just done. And anyways, long story short, she must have seen that I was planning on running away. And she ended up just saying, you could leave. And I said, well, make sure this is what you want, because I promise I will not be back. That was a month before I turned 17. Really, honestly, the best thing that my biological mom ever did for me is she sent me a letter. I lived with my best friend and her family, and she sent me a letter and said that I was going to live on the streets, become pregnant, not graduate. And it lit a fire in me of, I'm going to prove you wrong. And so that is what I did.
Yeah, you definitely have lived very successful life in your business and everything that we'll get into as well. Is there anything else you want to share about your teen years? You mentioned to me that you have a heart for the elderly, and you found a mom in your boss when you were working.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So after I had moved out, my biological mom, and then with my best friend, I worked 3 jobs my senior year before I graduated high school. And I did get my diploma. I got all C's and D's. I think my GPA was like 1 point something, but I didn't go to my graduation, but I did get my diploma. And that was a big deal for me. And then at that time, I had moved out with a boyfriend that I had had. And that was another thing. And I'm really transparent about this. I met this guy the end of my senior year. I ended up pregnant, like my mom had said. And then 6 weeks later, had an abortion. And then I ended up moving in with him. And then that's when a lot of shame, what did I do? It just a lot of the guilt, wanting to commit suicide. I started working after I graduated at a retirement home, assisted living, and I do still love the elderly. I ended up working there, and this lady who was the head boss, she did become like a surrogate mom to me. I just was going through a lot. I hadn't grieved my dad, so now I'm grieving the loss of my dad. I'm grieving the loss that I don't have any family, and I also took a baby. And so there was just a lot of self-hatred. I had tons, I don't know if tons is the right terminology is, but just, I would say huge garbage sack, huge, just a weight of self-hatred. Everything. I hated my hair. I had a tooth that was up here, I wouldn't smile in pictures. And so it was just really, I hated everything about myself. I self-mutilated a lot, cut myself, take my hand, smack my face so hard that I would have a handprint, pull out my hair. And so then I was in and out of the hospital from attempts of suicide. And then they get me on these different medications for someone who's bipolar and has all these different depression and everything. I was a mess. I did not know Jesus.
Yeah, well, and it makes sense that you'd be struggling so much at that point in your life because, again, you're still growing up, like you're young and you're in your teen years and don't have your family. And the way that you were treated growing up, you didn't have really many people other than maybe it sounds like your grandparents that were truly in your corner. And I appreciate you sharing all of that because it's important for us to understand stories like this to then realize how we get to a certain point. You didn't have all this self-hatred just because it came from this really traumatic childhood that you were still living in the moment. And I think that's how a lot of the issues that we see manifest in society, they begin so young, right? And it's just so important to realize, and understanding that helps us better empathize with stories we see coming down the road on the news or whatever it might be, realizing there's more to that story. There has to be more to that story. And so you sharing your stories, helping us in understanding that. So I thank you. As we move forward, let's move into the moment when God started to pursue you and you had a series of encounters with strangers, right? Share that. It's just a really amazing, incredible God story.
It really is. It is mind blowing. I had an experience just here in my shop, just really quick. Probably about 3 weeks ago, there was a gentleman that came in, young man, and I could just feel something on him and I couldn't get rid of it. And I just told him, I said, I got to tell you that God loves you and he is so proud of you. And I don't know if you know Jesus. And he's like, yeah, no, not yet. And I was like, well, all I know is God loves you. And I mean, I started crying because I could feel it so strongly after he left. I didn't want to think I was that weirdo, but it made me think of back when my time when Jesus was pursuing me. And you just don't ever know, right? And so for me, here I am. So I ended up with the guy that I had an abortion with, and we got married, and I was 19. And then within 6 months, we were separated, and then a year divorced. And so I was 20 and just trying to find myself and what I'm going to do, no family. And then it was a year of kind of partying, I guess, if you want to say that, but I didn't party really hard. But when I was 21, I was working at a bank. At this time, one of my roommates prior, she had been going to church and I was making fun of her for going to church, and she had invited me and I was like, you're stupid, I'm going to church. I didn't believe in God because I thought if there's a God, why does all this bad stuff happen to people? So anyways, I ended up working at this bank and this guy came in, asked me on a date, and went on a date with him. He starts talking to me about Jesus. And I was like, I do not believe in Jesus. But yet it was fascinating because he had just been to Israel. And so he was telling me of his whole experience in Israel. And I've always been a curious person and asked a lot of questions. So I was intrigued by his stories. And he took me to go meet this lady. Her name is Linnea. And I can say that because she's passed and she's my mom. And he took me to meet this lady, Linnea. And he said that this was his mom, which didn't make sense because she was white with 4 daughters on the walls and he was Argentinian. So I was like, that doesn't make any sense. But I didn't see any pictures of him. But knowing now who she is, it was his also spiritual mom. Anyway, she starts writing me letters and telling me how much Jesus loves me. And these are handwritten letters that I have. And I'm so grateful I have them. We lost her a few years ago, so I'm so grateful to have them. But she just started telling me how much Jesus loves me and that she's so sorry for the childhood that I've had and the things that I've endured. And I just thought she was nuts. And at this time, while she's writing me these letters, I'm working at this bank and we give free gifts to kids. And it was in October 1998. And we had these little pumpkin flashlights. And I remember giving this little kid a pumpkin flashlight and he says, do you have Jesus in your heart? I was like, yeah, sure, kid. Like, what in the world is happening? How do you know that I got this lady telling me about Jesus over here and the guy that I saw and dated? And then it was probably within the same week, I had another gentleman come in, did a transaction for him, never seen him before. He walks out and he's in the middle because it was a bank location inside one of the big grocery stores. He turns around and he says, Jennifer? And I said, yes. And he said, God loves you. And I was just like, what is happening here?
Yeah.
I'll never forget it. And I left work that night and I was going through dark things, inner turmoil that I was going through, not wanting to live anymore. And these angelic voices, and I'm not kidding you, they were angels that were singing on the radio and that were singing, Don't Give Up. And it was very angelic. I waited for the DJ to get on and say who was singing, and it just went into another song, like it just was in another song. And it was shortly after that, I remember praying the prayer with that guy that I was dating, and he was crying and I was just like, I don't understand why you're crying, but whatever. And I ended up starting going to church and I had hope for the first time in my life. I felt forgiven for everything. I mean, I felt washed white as snow, especially I got baptized right away after that. And it was a moving moment for me. I mean, I felt cleansed. It was miraculous. It was awesome.
Wow, that is quite the story, and just how God pursued you through all of these different people, these unlikely people that you don't even know coming into your life essentially and pursuing you. And it's just really, really incredible. Whatever happened to that guy? You ended up continuing to date or?
Yeah, no, actually, sadly, we dated, that was October 98. And then he got really weird and possessive of me. So 2 months in, it just got really weird. And he ended up backhanding me in the face. We got into an argument on New Year's Eve of that 98. Obviously, that went south and didn't go anywhere. And he was stuck in addiction, but he was hiding it. And he was stuck in alcoholism, but he was hiding it from everybody. And so it's really sad. I don't know where he's at now, but it's just really, really sad, broken. And that's why my mom, Linnea, who was Jesus with skin on to anyone that she'd meet, she would love. And she worked with addicts. She worked with Teen Challenge and stuff like that. So she just loved. And that's what she did.
And who knows, maybe just part of his purpose in your life, like he was struggling too. Like we all struggle with things. And really, he was just like a wonderful conduit to bringing God into your life.
Oh, absolutely.
If nothing else, right? So,
oh, yeah,
that's wonderful. Have you endured difficulty in your life and are perhaps considering sharing your own story too? I'm convinced the world needs your story. And so I've created a brand new toolkit to help you get it out into the world. Introducing the Confident Storytellers Toolkit. This 24-page comprehensive toolkit will help you craft and share your personal story with confidence. It's perfect for anyone who's walked a difficult path in life and wants to turn their pain into purpose. I've packed this toolkit full of support and guidance to help you share your story with confidence. And you can see the full list of things included at stephaniemjacobs.com/shop, where you can click on the toolkit to learn more. It's only $37, and I've included 3 bonuses to help you get the most out of your storytelling experience, one of which is a discounted coaching bonus. When you purchase the Confident Storytellers Toolkit, you'll gain instant access to book a reduced rate 30-minute one-on-one coaching call with me to help you put the finishing touches on your story. At only $37, my goal is to make this toolkit accessible to anyone. Go to stephaniemjacobs.com/shop to see all that's included. You've endured difficulty in your life, and it's time to confidently celebrate your redemption story. In doing so, you'll transform your pain into purpose and help others find the light they're seeking in their own stories too. Lovely, I hope you're as excited as I am for your story to get out into this world. Later on, you got married to your husband. Share about how you met and then what kind of started to transpire after that.
Yeah, so I met my ex-husband in church. I got saved in October 1998, and then we met in January of 99. Probably wasn't the best thing because I wasn't rooted and established in who I was in Jesus. And we met, we were friends. And then I think it was about April where it was like, okay, we're going to officially date. And I thought he was in church. This is a true man of God. This is awesome. And his family, he came from parents that were still together and all of that. So things that I longed for. So we ended up getting married in 2000 and things just started going south, honestly, on the honeymoon. And there was just a lot of, it started with sexual abuse, really. it was just really bad from the get-go. And then it was continually getting worse. And then physical abuse came later, but the mental, emotional, all that came later as well.
Yeah. And you have 3 boys, and you had your 3 boys with him. Could you just share about that? And you also mentioned how you stayed with your husband for a while. Were your boys part of the reason that you stayed with him?
Well, for sure, when everything first started happening as a church, it's kind of hard if I don't get into it, but I got really sick on our honeymoon, really sick, like throwing up and stomach stuff. And I was being punished because I wasn't fulfilling his need, the sexual need. And so I was like, what is going on here? And that's where I was getting punished right from the get go. And I was like, I'm not doing this on purpose. I'm truly sick. So that's how our marriage just played out. But I was also in the church, and the church, I would go to leaders and I would say, this is what's going on. And they would say that, what is it in the scripture, not to withhold from each other and all that. And so I'm like, well, I'm not withholding. It was a cycle of what I was living with my dad, is the 3 days of my dad. If I could get him to stay up 3 nights in a row, he was super nice. As long as I was performing for my ex-husband, then he was great. If it go 3 days, then it was hell. And so I was just this cycle of abuse. And there can be sexual abuse in marriages, and people don't realize that. And it's real. You have the manipulation and all of that. But I was trying to be the best godly wife and not to withhold and do all the things that the church people are telling me to do. Forgive, love them harder, all of those things. And so when I had my first son, who was 9 pounds 2 ounces, and I tore, I had him naturally, I had stitches. And so the doctors say, you need to wait at least 6 weeks because you've had this big baby that's come out of you. And he couldn't even wait a week. And now myself now, I'd be like, too bad, sorry. But I didn't. And I remember crying and thinking, you don't even care. And I built at that moment just a lot of resentment. And so that was in 2002. But then everything is, I'm looking at myself like it's all me. I'm the problem. I've got to be working on getting better or whatever. And so I ended up going to a workshop called Heart Change, which was really amazing. And that's when I really forgave my ex-husband. It was like, okay, I forgive him. So then we end up having another son, and then we'd still started cycling and started getting worse. But I don't know why I ended up having another son, and which was amazing. I have 3 amazing sons, but it got really bad and really ugly. And then in 2009, we separated for six or 8 months, I think. And I went back because for my boys and for God. So I shouldn't have gone back, but I did, because at that time, I'm calling myself, I don't want my kids to come from a broken childhood. I don't want them to come from a broken marriage, and not realizing until later on down the road that it was already broken. So just because you stay together doesn't mean that it's not broken already.
That's good. Yes. So what was it that was the final straw that broke the camel's back that tipped you into saying, this is it, enough is enough?
I honestly would still probably be in it to this day. And obviously words are my love language. And it was in June of 2014. There was a physical incident that happened, and my boys saw, and the police were called. And when the sheriff came out, the county sheriff, I will never forget these words. He said, ma'am, you are not raising boys, you are raising men, and they need to know that this behavior is unacceptable. And it changed my whole life, those words. He just gave me a domestic violence card because I begged him not to arrest my ex because it would have affected our livelihood. So anyways, with that, I called that number and started getting my ducks in a row and worked out with the domestic violence advocates, and we ended up getting a restraining order. And I still was holding out hope and thinking that we would work it out, but it got way worse. And so it didn't work out.
Yeah, I think it's interesting as you're sharing that part of your story, how essentially you were trying to stay in your relationship and just give more to your husband because of what you were learning through the gospel from church and also for your boys and all these things, these noble reasons. And essentially, from what I'm hearing, it guilted you out of shame to stay in that relationship. I mean, that's not the intention, but that ultimately is the message that you are wrestling with. And I just wanted to highlight how guilt can really shame us into things that God doesn't necessarily maybe want for us. Like if you're not in a healthy place and you're raising these boys and it took the affirmation of someone else externally to say, hey, it's okay to leave and you need to do something for your boys. I just think that's really powerful because internally we're wrestling with things that sometimes we can't put into words and fully realize until someone else verbalizes it for us.
Yes, absolutely. Well, and when we got back together in 2010, we started marriage counseling. And the marriage counselor, I swear, he must have been in the mafia at some point, where he was just this big Italian strong man, but very strong Christian, biblical. And I will never forget, he told me, look, character is the hardest thing to change. People can change, but it's the hardest. And he said, I will let you know if it's not changing with my ex-husband. And so I got to give a credit to my ex-husband because he really did get hammered for the first year, big time, going through that marriage counseling. And then we stopped going. And then the cycle started happening again. And we went back in February of 2014. And that's when they got in this heated stand up screaming match. And my ex walked out. And that's when my marriage counselor said, Jennifer, you will die in this and you cannot live in this anymore. And I think if I didn't have his words and him knowing us, I probably would have maybe not have called that domestic violence hotline number, but I had him, his voice in the back, and then the officer. And even through the whole separation, which was hell on earth, I remember telling my boys all the time, dad loves you to the capacity he knows how. And I had another Christian counselor that the boys were going to, and she told me, stop saying that. She said, you are teaching and training your boys to look for a perverted form of love. And I was just like, oh, wow. I never thought of it that way.
Oh, that is so eye-opening. Sometimes our best intentions really aren't helping. And it's hard to know that sometimes. And it takes other people to be like, hey, there's another perspective here in what we're hearing. Wow. You've really walked through a lot of difficulty. I mean, from the very beginning. And sometimes all you can say is like, it just doesn't feel fair. It's not right. Why does all of this have to happen to one person? And yet, I think part of the story that God must have for you is all of the resilience and grit and confidence and everything that we see coming through today, even just in your ability to share your story in such vulnerability and willingness. It's carried you through to this point and beyond where you're headed. And so I'd love to just hop to the part in your story that's the life-giving and the restoration that God has done in your story. Just share what your life is like now and share about Beloved Cheesecakes, your life with your husband, your children, all of that.
Yeah, my life now, it's kind of like pinch me. Someone has said, if you could go back in your life, would you change it or whatever? And to be honest, I wouldn't because it's given me the character that I have today. I'd like to say, oh, I would like to know Jesus sooner in life. But then really every encounter that I've had up till now would be completely different. What the enemy intends for bad, God uses for good. And when you're going through it, you don't feel like that. And when I went through 4.5 years of court and 12 court litigations and hell on earth and stalking orders, and I can tell you all kinds of stories, it was hell. And I didn't see what I'm seeing now, but God is so good and he's so faithful, even when we are so faithless, because there were many times where I was faithless and he's still so faithful and so good. after my separation, I went back to school. I got into the workforce where I was waitressing and working at a winery, being a mom, all of that. Went to school for social work. I thought that's what I was going to end up doing. And in the midst of all of that, I fell into making cheesecakes. I call it Godsidentally. I end up making cheesecakes as a side hustle. That's a whole another crazy story. But people kept saying, Jen, you should open up a shop. And I was like, never. I do not want to have my own business. My ex-husband was self-employed. I know the work of it. And God had something completely different in store for me, because now I opened Beloved Cheesecakes with a Kickstarter that started for my boys and I, and we opened in August of 2019. There was a line outside the door. It was wild. And now I have 2 locations. We ship nationwide. We're in 20 different restaurants. Since I talked to you the last month, we've been accepted into this really bougie store that has 3 locations called Zupan's Market in Portland, which
Wow.
a high honor because they only carry the best of the best. And so that's a really high honor. Someone said to me probably a couple years ago, said, Jen, you didn't create Beloved Cheesecakes for God. God created Beloved Cheesecakes for you. And that's the truth, because it's a kingdom business. I met my now husband through Beloved Cheesecakes. My son, who just turned 20, he met his wife through Beloved Cheesecakes. It's just been this amazing. I mean, I'm talking to you. If it wasn't because of Beloved Cheesecakes, I wouldn't be talking to you.
Right. It's opened up so many doors. And not just that, the relationships and all of it, but it's also provided this financial stability for your family, right? Which you really needed at the time when you started the business, as I understand.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that side hustle, then August, we had 8 months that were amazing before the lockdown. And then boom, the lockdown happens. And at that time, I didn't know my husband that I have now. And it was just the boys and I. So I stayed open, which got some backlash, but not planned. It got national attention. I was on Fox and Friends, and Kirk Cameron came to my shop, and just mind blowing people that I've met. I've served Eric Trump cheesecake. I mean, it's just a little wild.
Yeah. Wild and exciting. It's just incredible. And I also love too, I know that you hire people with special needs, which I think that's really, really special. My brother has Down syndrome, and I know that not every employer or shop does do that. And for those that do, it really provides such a wonderful opportunity, not just for the individual, but for really the customers too, because it brightens their day and it's just a beautiful thing all around. So I'm just curious, what inspired you to hire people with special needs?
When I was in high school, my senior year, I was actually reflecting on it just a couple of days ago. I was like, how did I even start working with special needs? But it was an English teacher, and her husband was the special ed teacher in high school. And she must have saw something in me, because she asked me if I'd be willing to work in her husband's classroom, and I was like, okay. And I loved it. When I was first married to my ex, I was an assistant for a little guy who had autism and was his aide for the whole school year. I loved it. They're the true kings and queens of our world. I mean, there's a purpose. They have purpose, and they need to know that they have purpose, and they have an ability. I truly believe they are angels in human form, because they have an ability that we might be the ones with the disability, I think, because they love unconditionally. They accept unconditionally. They don't care what you're wearing. I just went out on Monday and she's like a niece to me. She's got cerebral palsy. I don't say it correctly, but we went and got pedicures. And, I could be singing with her, and I don't have a good voice, and she just thinks this is the best thing ever. They don't have the judgment. I think we're the ones with the true disability.
Oh, that is so beautiful. I love that you said that. And it's so true. Like I always say myself, I've said it many times. My brother with Down syndrome, I always say he's an earth angel. Like I know there is something special, and I know God has a purpose in bringing and sharing his love and light to this earth. And it's just so true. There's so much happiness and joy and everything that they have that the rest of us are just missing. And I think that's a wonderful way to say it. So thank you for that. Before we wrap up, a couple things. I just love to kind of glean some of the wisdom that we're gaining through your story. And one of the things would be really beautiful to touch on is I know you told me that you got to save a life through sharing your life of abortion. Could you share that with us?
Yes. Thank you for reminding me that. So right after I got saved in October of 98. And then it was probably in the spring of 99, I had invited a gal to a college age group with me. She got saved there, which was awesome. The next week, she reached out to me and said, hey, one of my friends just found out she's pregnant and she wants to have an abortion. And I don't know what to do. She wants someone to take her there. And so I called our college aid pastor and I said, what do I do? Because I would like to talk with this girl and let her know the details on what's to come afterwards and that emotional grief afterwards. He said, well, I don't think, you should take her to the clinic because then you'll be partaking in that. But he said, if she chooses to continue, even after if you get the opportunity to talk to her, he said, you could surely be there to pick her up because course, the saying that Jesus loves the sinner, not the sin, whatever. So anyways, I end up getting to meet with her and have lunch. And I got to share with her everything, the whole process, the emotional grief, all of that afterwards, the shame. And she went home and she was 19. She went home and told her mom. And her mom broke down because she had been raised by a single mom. And her mom broke down and cried and said, your dad wanted me to abort you. So really cool. She ended up having a little boy. And so it was just a full circle healing for me where I took a life, but God used me to save a life.
Yes. Oh, that's so beautiful. And it was healing for you, but you saved her from also going through that same grief too. So you really helped 3 people in all of that.
Oh, yeah.
I just love how your business is impacting your children's life too. I know that you said that they've been alongside of you since the beginning. Share how it's impacting them further. Is there anything else you want to say on that?
Yeah, well, my oldest son, he was my main baker with me for quite some time. And now he lives in Florida. Just found out today he got offered a really amazing job. I don't want to disclose it yet, but it's really incredible job. So he's got to go through this whole background process and everything.
Wow. Yes. Amazing.
I believe it's God's favor. And he was with YWAM for the last 3 or 4 years. So just out of God honoring his faithfulness and obedience, it's really awesome. And it's a passion and dream of him. So it's really cool. And then my middle son just turned 20. And he's pretty much my partner in this. He's very entrepreneur minded. He runs our first location while I'm up here with my husband running our second location. They're just learning so much. If I would have been learning what I was learning at his age, oh my gosh, I'd be so much further in life. But It's really cool to see what's going to be for them. And then my younger son, who's 16, he's also very entrepreneur minded. He runs this location with us. He trains employees, runs events, and he's 16. They get to go. We were at a business conference and we got to hear Robert Kiyosaki, who wrote Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And
oh, yes.
They've got to hear Eric Trump talk about business and the Trump organization. They've got to meet really, really successful business people, and they're 20 and 16. And that's incredible. So it's setting them up for success.
Yeah. I just love how this business has literally transformed your life. It's brought you new relationships, your marriage, your family, your finances, your relationship with your community, your relationship with God, and how you're able to serve and give back. And we didn't even hardly talk about that, but I know that you give back through your business too. And just how, if you could compare what your children's life could have been without the business and with your ex-husband to what they have now. And it's just like this night and day difference. And it's just such a beautiful picture. And that's why I really wanted you on this show, because you've gone through not just one hard thing, you've gone through so many different hard, difficult things, and yet you're rooted in your faith. You're a successful business owner. You have a loving family. You're giving and engaging in your community. It's just this story of the light and everything that this show really is here to help share with the world. So I just really appreciate you taking the time to give us that opportunity to hear your story and glean the things that you are sharing today. Is there anything that you would say to anyone who might be walking through something similar, whether it's abusive relationship that they feel trapped in or anything else that you've walked through? How would you encourage them?
Just be authentically you. You have to feel to heal. That's what my mentor would tell me all the time. Stuff buried alive doesn't die. And to walk through your lake of pain and not go around it, not stay stuck, but go through that lake of pain, trudge through it with God and hold on to Him the whole way, even being authentic. I was flipping him off and very angry, but just to stay the course and you will get through. And there is light at the end of the tunnel. I remember people saying that to me and I was like, I don't see any light at the end of the tunnel, but there is. Just go through the lake of pain, because if you don't go through it, you're going to end up back in the same kind of cycle. I don't know if that helps any.
Yeah, no, I think that's very beautiful. And of course, it's very helpful because it's what your lived experience has been. And we can see where your life is today and that truly you did find the light and you got there with God and other people in your life. And so thank you so much, Jen. This has been a true honor. I appreciate you sharing your story on the podcast and just thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie, so much. And keep up doing what you're doing. I love what you're doing.
Thank you. Isn't that quite the story? Jen has gone through many tremendously difficult things in her life, things that began in her childhood, things that she had to endure at no fault of her own that then led to more brokenness in how she saw herself and in the life she was living. I think about that so often when I see someone struggling or hear of something really terrible happening. I wonder, what pain is that person dealing with? What trauma have they endured? There's always more to the story than we see on the surface. We are broken as humanity, and we can come from broken circumstances, but that doesn't mean brokenness is the end of our story. Jen's story is a true redemption story. God has restored her life in every sense and blessed her with a flourishing business, family, and relationships. If you haven't yet taken a look at Beloved Cheesecakes, now is a great time to do so. If you pull up her website, belovedcheesecakes.com, and navigate to the Our Story tab, you'll get to hear more from Jen about what her business really means to her. I love how the first thing she says is, Beloved Cheesecakes belongs to God. I am His beloved, and He is mine. I didn't create Beloved Cheesecakes for God. God created Beloved Cheesecakes for me. She is now bringing glory to God through the story of her business. It's really beautiful, isn't it? I'll link both her Instagram and her website in the show notes. Did this episode touch your heart? If you loved today's story and have a relatable experience to share, encouraging words for our guests, or just want to share a comment, go to the show notes for this episode and send us what we like to call heart mail for a chance to have your note featured on an upcoming episode. If there's a large response to any particular story, we might just bring that guest back on the show to dive into your comments, or even have them join us as a guest in the Love Light Stories Facebook community. It's as easy as sending us a voice message or written note, both easily accessible in today's show notes. Simply go to stephaniemjacobs.com and click on the Stories tab. So, give it a try. Send us your heart mail. I just can't wait to hear what's on your heart. And hey, thank you so much for listening to this podcast and leaning into today's story. And don't forget, you can subscribe to the show wherever you listen to your podcast so you don't ever miss an episode. And a great way you can support these conversations is to rate the show and leave a review. And if you have a friend who would like these stories, share it with them too. All of these things are the best way you can support this podcast. So thank you. And until next time, lovelies, Keep radiating that love and light to everyone you meet.